The SA Private Ambulance and Emergency Services Association has warned if attacks on paramedics continue, they'll have no choice but to withhold services to communities considered high risk. This comes after paramedic Phumzile Dlamini was killed and her colleague wounded in the eMabhanoyini area near Estcourt on Monday night. The association is calling on Police Minister Estcourt to act swiftly to prosecute those responsible. Oliver Wright is the CEO of the South African Private Ambulance Association and joins us now. Oliver, thanks for making time. How many paramedics have been attacked just this year from this violence? I mean, it really looks like these incidents are increasing.
They're definitely increasing, Clement. We don't know the exact number at the moment. The specific reason is that there are paramedics working across a number of agencies between the private and public sector. But we've seen a consistent increase over the last 3 years. In the Western Cape alone, for example, last year there were approximately 30 attacks on ambulance crews. This year we're at about 45 already. And that's just in one province. We've seen attacks in KwaZulu-Natal, we've seen attacks in the Eastern Cape, we've seen attacks in Northwest, and those are just the ones that we know about. Those are the ones that get reported. Often the smaller, what we consider non-violent attacks go unreported because they're just becoming so commonplace these days. And it's shameless and it's completely unnecessary, and ultimately it's going to affect those same communities. So no ambulance service wants to withhold services from any specific community. But unfortunately, the safety of the paramedics has to come first. And if we find ourselves in a situation where we feel that the paramedics are going to be at risk if they go and assist members of that community, unfortunately, they're not going to be allowed to travel into those communities to pick up patients. We need those paramedics. Their families need them. The community needs them to be available tomorrow and the day afterwards to continue to assist them in cases of emergency. And we have to protect their safety. So this is a very serious concern, not only for our paramedics, but for the communities as a whole that get affected by the violent acts of a few rogue members of the community.
What kind of attacks are these? Are we talking here about just mostly opportunistic criminals that are also trying to steal? And because I know a couple of years ago, ambulance services were withdrawn from communities for this very reason. And that must be a tough decision on you that you often are confronted with, because you have to decide whether you go in or not to protect yourselves.
Absolutely. The paramedics themselves, as well as the management structures of the various organizations, whether they be private or provincial EMS services, to make that decision to withdraw services or to withhold services is heartbreaking at the end of the day. Nobody wants to do it. I think, to answer your question, yes, in a number of instances it has been opportunistic crime, or the impression that there is the possibility of opportunistic crime, because realistically, paramedics these days know that they're at risk. They don't actually carry anything really of value. The radios in the ambulances are locked to the channels that are being used. With technology these days, as soon as those radios get stolen, we can lock them in. We can lock them remotely so that they're no longer of use to anybody. So nobody wants to buy them. The medical equipment on board, the medical community is very small. We can identify that as stolen equipment very quickly if anybody tries to sell it. So nobody buys stolen medical equipment. The guys that perpetrate these crimes end up with a whole lot of stolen items that are of absolutely no financial value to them. All it does is it delays the provision of services, because now you've stolen a defibrillator, you've stolen a ventilator, you've stolen a jump bag which contains a whole lot of medical equipment which is essential to providing services not only for the rest of the shift, but for the rest of the week, the next month or two it takes to replace that equipment. So even if the paramedics and the ambulance are still available, the equipment to provide those life-saving techniques has been stolen. It's not there for us to use.
So how are you dealing with this then? How are you dealing with this? Do your members undergo some form of training to protect themselves? Are you working with law enforcement? What's the plan?
There have been a number of requests to the South African police services to send escorts along with the ambulance services when they go into high-risk areas. Unfortunately, as we all know, the SAP's resources are stretched thin, despite management's claims to the contrary. Those SAP's members aren't available a lot of the time to assist us, simply because they're so busy. We need more SAP's members on the ground. We need more vehicles to assist us. Unfortunately, our members are not trained in law enforcement. They're not physically trained to combat these sorts of attacks. So as much as we can empower them with self-defense techniques, they are often no match for these criminals that are very violent in nature. So the only option here, instead of saying to our paramedics, okay, we've given you self-defense training, we're sending you into these high-risk areas without any police support, we can't do that. The only realistic option is to say there are certain red zone communities, which is common practice across the country now, that there are certain red zones that ambulances will not go into. The family or a neighbor must bring the patient out of the area to us and meet us at a safer area. But unfortunately, if there's no private transport available, or if the ambulance can't get close enough, that does impact on service delivery. So as much as we can say to our paramedics, we'll provide you with self-defense training, they're no match for these violent criminals. So the only sensible thing to do is not to send them into the area in the first place.